Welcome to the Holy Shit Cultcast. I'm Kurt Mooney, your host, and it's time for our first religious sect deep dive. In this episode, we're covering the Religious Society of Friends, also known as the Quakers. The Quaker movement is this badass religion that does not get nearly the press that it deserves. And you'll understand why I say that as we dive deeper into their origin story, their core beliefs, and also the historical events that they took part in over their nearly 400-year history. And believe it or not, they're still around today. So, let's set the scene by providing some historical context. And we're going to start with Europe. It's the 1640s and it is on fucking fire. They're in the middle of the 30 Years' War. And for those of you that don't know what it's about, guess what they fight about? Religion. It's the Catholics versus the Protestants, and it is absolutely fucking nuts. This is the bloodiest religious conflict in European history, and it's actually going to end up leaving millions of people dead, both from bloodshed, obviously, but more importantly, from disease and famine. Approximately 4 to 8 million people in total. Now, while all of this is going on in mainland Europe, the English were having their own special version of it called the English Civil War, because once upon a time, King Henry VIII decided that he wanted a divorce, and the Catholics weren't going to let him do that, so he made his own religion. Seriously, though, it was the Anglicans versus the Puritans, the Royalists versus the Parliamentarians. And England is where our focus is going to be for now, because this is where the star of today's episode, the religion England is going to be our focus for now, because this is where the star of today's episode and the religion he espoused were both born. So, say hello to Mr. George Fox. So this dude, he wasn't anybody really affluent. He grew up maybe lower middle class. He apprenticed as a cobbler. He didn't really enjoy it. In his profession, he had a lot of time and probably shoes on his hands. And around the age of 23 or 24, he had this series of mystical experiences, and one of his biggest revelations was this. So he concluded that no human mediator, meaning no priest, as well as none of the other things that come along with that, so no sacraments and no churches, were needed to reach God. Instead, he believed that every person had access to the inner light, which he later called, quote, that of God in everyone, close quote. Now, this insight was a little bit radical for 17th century England, where the Catholics, the Anglicans, and a lot of the puritanical offshoots believed that they had the ultimate religious authority to bring it back home to Sky Daddy. So, now let's talk about the really fun part, which was his preaching style. So this dude would walk into churches, which he affectionately referred to as steeplehouses, middle of their service, and he would start loudly denouncing the minister as a fraud, like shouting him down in front of the entire congregation. Right? And he did this because he saw the clergy as basically professional middlemen who were profiting off of people's hunger for spirituality. Okay? Now, as a part of this contrarian nature of his, he also refused to observe the social norms of the time, so he would never remove his hat as a sign of respect, because he believed that everyone was equal. And as you can imagine, the aristocracy and the people in charge really didn't like that. He also refused to swear oaths in court, because he believed that, like Jesus said, you should, quote, let your yea be yea and your nay be nay, close quote. Close quote. And additionally, he also insisted that women could speak and lead spiritually, which was unthinkable at the time. Now, because of this, how should we say, disruptive nature he ended up being thrown into jail or prison on multiple occasions. And during one of the trials, there was this judge in Derby that he said should tremble at the word of the Lord, and this judge mocked him as a Quaker. And the insult stuck. The Religious Society of Friends decided to wear it as a badge of honor, and they dubbed themselves the Quakers from then on. Now, before we go any further, let's talk about why he gained popularity in this time, like why this whole movement gained traction. George's shtick was that all religions were wrong because clergy, liturgy, and religious authority in general were used to separate the common man from God and were wholly unnecessary. Basically, he believed that spirituality and your relationship to God were personal matters and could be achieved on your own. Now, let's talk a little bit more in depth about their core beliefs. I pulled quite a few of these from their actual website, Quaker.org, which if you haven't checked it out and you'd like to learn more, that's a great resource. So, number one on the list here that I pulled down. Again, there is that of God in everyone. This belief is that we all have the divine light of God within us, and we are all sacred and interconnected. Each person is capable of the direct and unmediated experience of God. It's a belief system. This belief system leads them to a form of worship that does not rely on clergy or liturgy. No, now let's talk about their meetings. So their meetings are kind of interesting. They start in what they call the silence, or sometimes it's referred to as a waiting worship. Basically, they'll sit around in a group, kind of in a semicircular presentation where you're kind of facing each other, right? But they'll sit there in total silence. Everybody walks in, they sit down, they don't talk at all. Not until somebody within that group is moved upon to speak, to say something to the group that could be edifying. And to kind of further this point, this is what their website says. They say, our understanding and experience of God is nurtured and enlarged in community. When we come together in community, each of us brings our own manifestation of the divine. They believe the Bible is important, but revelation is ongoing through you and everybody else. And in fact, they go even further than that by saying, we welcome truth from whatever source it may come. Sound familiar? They believe in doing. They believe that doing is more important than just believing. And the famous Quaker expression is, that's tied to that, let your life speak. Authenticity is a very big thing with these guys, and we'll get more into that in just a second. Now, circling back to George Fox and what's going on at the time that this is starting to take off. The Quakers terrified both the church and the establishment, right? They wouldn't remove their hats or use titles, which was undermining the rigid class system that they had at the time. They refused to pay tithes to the church, which was affecting them financially, and they also wouldn't swear allegiance to the crown or fight in the military because they were pacifists, which was a huge no-no. And in fact, so there's one funny story about George Fox. So during one of the times he's thrown into jail, it's actually during the end of the English Civil War, and I can't recall if it was after the Puritans took power and beheaded King Charles I, or after King Charles II took back power from the Puritans. But anyway, they came to him while he's in prison and said, hey, if you will swear an oath of allegiance, we'll allow you to leave. But it's a requirement for your release that you have to swear this oath of allegiance. And he basically said, fuck you guys, I'll stay here. And his reasoning was that Christ said, swear not at all. Let your yea be yea and nay be nay. And the reason for this is he believed that swearing oaths implied that there were two tiers of truth. There was ordinary truth and truth you only tell under oath. And he insisted that truth should always be truth. But like that was a hill he was willing to die on, or a prison he was willing to rot in for, I guess. Anyway. So to the authorities, this was social anarchy, right? But to ordinary people, this is electrifying because suddenly, rather than the haves being in control, dictating how you get back to live with Sky Daddy someday, the power is in the hands of the people. And so because of this grassroots nature of the movement, Quakerism spread like wildfire through England, Scotland, Ireland, even into the New World. And they held these massive outdoor meetings. They ignored clergy, and they relied on these traveling preachers that they called publishers of truth. And they were so disruptive, in fact, that the English passed the Quaker Act in 1662, which outlawed it in England. And so there was this mass exodus of people that moved to the colonies in the 1660s. Now, all of this is pretty cool. And one thing that we want to try to touch on every time we do one of these deep dives is to investigate some of more of like the scandals or the weirdness or the things that would make you go, maybe not. But I honestly had a difficult time digging up anything on the Quakers, really. Nothing as nefarious as what you'd find in other locales, shall we say. The things that I did find were, in the beginning, there was some naked street preaching, which was used as kind of like I don't know, to get people's attention, I guess. They tried raising the dead and were not successful. Unfortunately, no Lazarus stories here. They believed in the tradition of holy kisses, which was kind of a scandalous thing at the time. But really, that's all I got, guys. That's it. Now, aside from that, One thing that we can touch on is the pillars of their doctrine. Okay, and it's actually summed up on their website in an acronym that they have called SPICE, and the S stands for simplicity. They don't believe in being very flashy, having lots of money, or showing that they have lots of money, if you will. They believe in living a modest life. You don't need to do anything extravagant. The P stands for peace. They're pacifists, so that makes sense. I for integrity. Again, they believe in being honest in their dealings with their fellow man. The Mormons could learn a few things there. Community is huge because there is that of God in everyone, and they believe that you can share with others and you can also receive from others in that spiritual sense. And of course, the E stands for equality. So SPICE: simplicity, peace, integrity, community, and equality. I might just become a fucking Quaker, guys. We can hang it up because these guys kind of have it figured out. Now, aside from that, let's talk about just a few of the notable Quakers. So, Sufism B. Anthony, the champion of women's rights, she was a Quaker. Levi Coffin, you've never heard the name, I would assume, but he was the president of the Underground Railroad. Bayard Rustin was Martin Luther King's strategist who organized the march on the Capitol. Not the January, anyway, yeah. Hosier was raised as a Quaker, believe it or not. Explains the vibes, I guess. And we also had 2 presidents. And you're never going to guess who they were because they don't exactly follow these ideals because they were raised as Quakers, but I don't think that they stayed Quakers. Herbert Hoover and Richard fucking Nixon. Dude, never would have guessed that one in a million years. So, to kind of wrap things up here, as far as the doctrines that we want to curate from these guys, the first and the most important, in my opinion, is that we should see that there is that of God in everyone. One of the things that Megan and I have been kind of bouncing around on, religiously speaking, is to try to eschew or to stay away from just the negative, shit talking, because there's a lot of that goes on, religiously speaking, you know? We want to be able to see the good, and we want to be able to be the good. And I think in adopting that belief that there is that of God in everyone, and that sense of community, and that there is truth to be found in all and believing that we should welcome truth from whatever source it may come. So the 3 things, I guess, that I would curate from this group would be that there is that of God in everyone, we welcome truth from whatever source it may come, and that you should let your life speak. So, that's my take for this week. So, to quote George Fox, to conclude, walk cheerfully over the world, answering that of God in everyone. And stick around for the next episode, guys, because we're going to be talking about somebody who is similar in name, but that's about it. The Shakers are the sect that took no sex before marriage to the absolute extreme. And by that, I mean they lived like absolute fucking monks with no sex ever, but they made some really awesome fucking furniture. So, thanks for sticking around, guys. Again, this is the Holy Shit Cultcast. I've been your host, Kurt Mooney. Party on.